All right, boys, I know what you're thinking. Alex already made a 36-minute video where he spent 31 of those minutes ranting about the dev note. This video is not for the players. This video is for the developers. I decided after I made that 36-minute rant video that I wanted to make another one because as much as I was speaking from the heart, I was also speaking off the cuff and really off the dome. And so I didn't have a lot of time to crystallize and really hammer down my opinions into a concise format. And I want that available and I want that publicly out there so that the devs don't just watch the 36-minute video where I say things like pussy and up your ass and other things. And that's their only impression of my opinion about the patch, about the dev note. Okay. So, and again, in case you didn't vibe with the 36-minute video, maybe you'll find something to vibe with on this one, or maybe you'll just hate my opinions and ideas even more. But I want to give you now, I wrote notes for this one. I very rarely write notes for a video. I basically do them all off the dome 100% of the time, based on like my thoughts and my memory and stuff. This one I'm going to do with a sort of script, okay? So this is the 9-year anniversary dev note. I'm not going to talk about the stuff that we already talked about, looking back on the past. That's cool. I'm going to kick it off right away with new content in development, okay? And I just want to go piece by piece and highlight exactly what they're saying and then my take on it, okay? So first off is the narrative content, this new narrative content. I'm not going to summarize what it is, but essentially the pros of this content is that it's new content. It's unique content, unlike anything else. And they are positioning it, I misread it the first time, but they are positioning it as different than Legendary Battle and Epic Quest. However, I feel that there is some implied similarity if you're going to immediately say, hey, like this is different, but you're going to bring up two specific game modes that are alike and say that it's different than those game modes. But we'll have to see. Now, what are the cons of this kind of game mode? Again, this is just my speculation. This is just my opinion. But the cons of this kind of game mode are my first potential con, and my first question is, if it's non-repetitive content, which they try to say that it's not repetitive content, then does that mean you're only going to be able to get rewards once? The second con for this type of game mode is in reference again to Legendary Battle and Epic Quest, which is that while the one-time rewards for those game modes are very good, CTPs, rank up tickets, etc., the repetitive rewards for those game modes are bad. And so I see this inherent sort of flaw potentially growing in a game mode that you're positioning as not a repetitive game mode. So I'm wondering, how frequently are we going to be tasked with playing, or are we going to be able to play this narrative game mode? Is it going to be once a week, once a month, right? Once per character, like that we own? And then what will those rewards be? And the reason why I'm bringing this up now, I'm not making everything about rewards, but this is going to be a big theme throughout the rest of the video, which is the idea that players perform what is called a value equation when they are presented with a new game mode. And this is in any game. This is not just Marvel Future Fight. This is almost all games nowadays. Almost all games. And the value equation goes something like this, okay? It looks like this. This is the value equation. On the top bracket, we have, and I'm not a huge math guy, but on the top bracket, we have fun plus rewards times 2. And you can read that as like rewards squared, but I'm writing this on like JS Paint, so it's pretty primitive, okay? So this is important stuff here. And then on the bottom, you have the other stuff, which is time to complete plus complexity plus effort. And this is important. This is an important thing to note here because players will make this value equation. They will calculate this in their heads. They will calculate this based on what other players have told them, what content creators have told them, etc., right? And then they will make a decision on whether they are going to invest in a game mode, whether they're going to play the game mode, try the game mode at all, or whether they're going to uninstall the game, right? If you have a game where it's very, very high on fun, but there's basically no rewards, it doesn't matter, right? There are very few games that are think about a game right now that's super fun that has no rewards for playing. It doesn't matter what the time to complete is or the complexity or the effort. You're probably going to end up with a negative number over here and you're not going to like it. Conversely, when you have a game that's somewhat fun, like Marvel Future Fight, and has somewhat balanced rewards, then the equation actually starts to make sense, right? And this equal sign here basically is whether or not, you play or not, right? Play or don't play. That's basically what this boils down to. And so the developers of any game need to be very careful when they're making a game because, of course, this is important, right? But also, right, of course this is important, but also this is important. And then you need to take into consideration the time to complete, right? This is why something like, for example, Alliance Conquest. We'll talk about Alliance Conquest later, but it's a great example now. The time to complete Alliance Conquest just is so massive that it makes this a don't play every time for the majority of players, right? Meanwhile, you have something like, let's just say, the Legendary Battle, right? Legendary Battle is super fun, really big fun, right? Let's give it a 10 for fun. But then the rewards are like a 1. Now, the time to complete is not very much. It's like a 1. The complexity is like a 1. And the effort's like, let's say a 2. But you end up with an equation that's still not very beneficial to the player, right? 11/4. Whatever that means doesn't really matter, right? The numbers themselves don't actually matter. But this is more like the idea, the essence. And so I position this idea to the developers because they're not considering, or they're not really respecting the value equation. The value equation is very important. It's not all about rewards, right? You can have a game mode that is pretty fun and has low rewards as long as you make the time to complete, complexity, and effort all low. If you make them high, like for example, what they did with World Boss Legend, they jacked up the effort, they jacked up the complexity, they made both of these things very difficult, right? And the rewards are just a little bit better. So what do players do? Nah, I'm not going to play Kang. I'm not going to do that. That's boring. I'm just going to go back and play the easy ones. Because that's the value equation. That's the value equation. So the value equation is super important. And I fear as though this content here with this narrative content will not respect the value equation and will just be ignored by players, okay? Because essentially, you have to balance these two things. You have to balance these two things. All right, I don't want to spend too long talking about it, but that's essentially what it boils down to. The second piece of thing that they mentioned is the new collectible growth content. That sounds great. I don't really have any issues with that. And then the last one here that they mentioned about new content is multiplayer content with a blocking waves of enemies together type game mode. Now this one here, again at pros, it's new content, it's multiplayer. Waves implies the possibility of a high score or a scoreboard, which is great. And then also the fact that it's multiplayer, but that there's waves and that there could be a scoreboard implies that there could be a combination of friendly cooperation within a team, but then friendly competition between teams. This is very much like Danger Room Extreme, right? Very, very similar in that context to Danger Room Extreme. And then you have the idea, this is another pro for it, about the individual role being important. Now, what they mean by role, they're talking about DPS, damage, lead, and support, which are the 3 traditional roles in Marvel Future Fight. Are they talking about some other kinds of roles, traditional to RPG games like healing, etc., tanking? I don't know. We're going to have to wait and see. Now, the cons of a game mode like this, if you take that comparison to Danger Room Extreme a little bit further, right? Because that was the last game mode that has been removed from the game, is Danger Room Extreme. Then the rewards for this kind of content will be important. Again, we bring up rewards because we bring up the value proposition. If I'm going to wait in a queue, if I'm going to wait to play 5 minutes and I'm going to queue up and the match is going to be 30 seconds, the value proposition gets very out of balance very easily. So the devs have to be very careful with how they do this. And we know for a fact that all multiplayer content will introduce some kind of queue, right? GBR, there's some kind of queue when you're queuing up. Unless you're playing with AI, which is not technically multiplayer content, right? So they have to be careful with the value equation there. The other issue is, are the rewards for this game mode going to be exclusive rewards? Or are they going to be rewards that cannibalize a different game mode? We've talked about this before with World Boss Legend Plus now. The existence of Kang cannibalized the rewards from Gore and the other bosses, making it, as long as the difficulty is not too hard for you, it always makes more sense to play Kang. And then Black Swan does the exact same thing to all of the previous bosses before her, with Jean being the only standout that actually has some type of new or exclusive reward. So that's important there. And then the other question is whether teams are going to be repetitive or not. And we can again take the example and take a cue from Danger Room Extreme. For those of you that played, you remember, I've got a Moonstone, you've got a Moonstone, the other guy's got a Moonstone. Okay, let's queue up with our triple Moonstone team. Oh, look, the enemy team also has 3 Moonstones. Okay, so it's essentially a standoff, right? And it's a race to whoever can pull their gun and shoot faster. And that's a very reductive kind of game mode. That's a very boring, a quickly exhaustive and repetitive type of content that is not fun for anyone, except for those who are always winning, right? Which is a very, very small percentage of players. That's not really what games modes should be designed for. And so that's another thing that's important to consider the possibilities there. So hopefully the devs have considered all of these possibilities and considered all these concerns. Now let's move on to the PvP content to be improved. So again, they listened to the opinions of agents, and they have a bunch of ideas for these different game modes. So for timeline battle, they're going to be applying skill cooldown logic to the defending AI team that matches the player attacking team. I think this is a good change. It should make PvP battles feel better, if more fair, more balanced. It's going to make them a little bit longer, but I think that's a good thing. And I'll remind you guys of how it was once upon a time in early 2021, where we had Sentry, the big bad villain. Or not, he was a hero, but he was like the whale villain in PvP, sort of dominating everybody else. And then they introduced the Defenders team, and Luke Cage and Sentry would have these insanely cool battles that would last a long time, because neither one of them had insane burst damage. Now, some players might not like a long, protracted battle, but it can be very cool, and it can be very thematic, and it can look really nice visually because you get to see what's going on. It's not just a one-shot fiesta. However, I will mention that a lot of that had to do with the way the characters were designed, which we'll talk about a little bit later as they mention Pierce and things like that. The character design is really important. The devs have sort of painted themselves into a corner by developing characters, more and more characters like Adam Warlock, like Wolverine, with very high burst damage skills or very long burst damage iframes, which are very difficult to counterbalance. And you have to just basically, in order to beat a really fast, really strong gun, you have to make an even faster, even stronger gun. And then the only way to beat that newer, faster, stronger gun is to make an even faster and even stronger gun. And it sort of escalates into infinity. And in a few years, we're going to be looking at some, grotesque Adam Warlock tier 6 that one-shots with every single skill and has 0 cooldown, and he's just like a machine, right? It just doesn't work. It just doesn't work. So the devs need to look in the mirror, and they need to realize and recognize that part of the problem is the way that they're developing characters, not just the way that the game modes are developed, because there is an interaction there that they're not exactly acknowledging, in this dev note. Now, the second thing they go on to say is that they're going to be adjusting penalties for attackers through sufficient discussion. This is unclear. I'll attempt a little bit of speculation here, but penalties for attackers could take a bunch of different, could look at a bunch of different ways. For example, it could lower the points that you get when you win against the same defending team repeatedly, which discourages players from like hunting for a specific player who has a weaker team, or like creating a team composition to counter one specific team and then just attacking them repeatedly. That's what they could mean by attacking penalties. It could lower things like, or increase things like critical damage resistance for defending teams, so that crit is not as explosive of a stat and doesn't create so much burst damage. And it can also be reducing pierce damage received for defending teams to make, again, more longer protracted battles that feel more skill based and less sort of luck based. Who got one shot first, you or me? It's unclear right now, but these seem like they're going sort of in the right direction. And then they mentioned some quality of life and convenience features for timeline battle. However, I want to highlight what they're missing, because what I failed to mention in my video was things that they have not addressed here that are still very, very important. And so they say that they're listening to the opinions of our agents, but I question them with the following. Where did they mention, where is the mention of improving team diversity for timeline battle? The teams are all the same, right? No mention of team diversity. They mention it later with Otherworld Battle and Alliance Conquest, but they don't mention it for Timeline Battle, and that's important. Where is the mention of improving matchmaking for players in Bronze, Silver, and Gold leagues, right? Their experience is horrible because those teams and those leagues are filled with whales using triple tier 4s and all these ridiculous teams stacked with brilliant CTPs and perfect cards. New players going into Bronze and Silver leagues trying to climb up to Gold, Platinum, and Vibranium should not be met with these impossible odds, this David versus Goliath type of thing. They should be facing other players around their power level. There needs to be some sort of instituted power level gating to force high-end players to fight against other high-end players, right? Same goes for me and Vibranium or players in Challenger. You don't want, Challenger's a different thing, but for Vibranium, for example, you don't want to be in Vibranium and queue up against a weak team. You want to be challenged. You're in Vibranium. You took the time. You made the effort to climb up to Vibranium. You should be rewarded with challenging content, right? So they need to address this for sure. And then the third thing is they don't talk anywhere about improving rewards, the weekly rewards for Timeline Battle. How long have those rewards been the same for everyone outside of Challenger? Years now. Years. It's high time that they change them, that they improve them. Next up, we have Otherworld Battle. They talk about the debuff character system being enhanced to allow more diverse teams. This is an excellent change. No notes here. However, this is the only thing they mentioned for Otherworld Battle. So I have to get my clipboard out and start talking about what they've missed. So what have they missed for Otherworld Battle? Well, how about expanding the scope and creativity of the battlefield effects? Not just focusing on debuffing overpowered characters. Now, don't get me wrong, debuffing overpowered characters and overused characters like Jean, Wolverine, Atom, Thanos, Silver Surfer, that's important. It's also important to recognize when you have a lot of cool characters that are weak. Even characters that are recent, like Gladiator for PvP, like Wendell Vaughn for PvP. What about these characters? What about the iframe ignore you gave to Havoc? You could buff these characters. You could give them enormous buffs to encourage players to build these characters, encourage players to enjoy them in a game mode, at least for a little while, rather than just debuffing. Debuffs are important, right, for the balance of the game, but buffing is also important. Balance is really key, okay? So I do encourage the devs to explore that a little bit more so that they can, it's not, okay, what's left after everything's been nerfed, but it's rather like, oh, they're buffing all of the defenders, so I should try to use the defenders this month in Otherworld Battle. Hey, I only have Luke Cage built, so I'll use Luke Cage. Maybe I have time to build Daredevil. Maybe I have time to build Jessica Jones. Or maybe for the biggest whales, hey, I'm gonna give Iron Fist a brilliant regen because I'm gonna sweep up PvP this week. I'm gonna sweep up Otherworld Battle this week because of the insane battlefield effect for defenders, right? Again, these are areas they could explore, they could be exploring. Finally, we come to Alliance Conquest, by far the biggest albatross game mode in Marvel Future Fight, the one that needs the most help. They get a few lines here. So they talk about adjusting the duration and battle timer. This is a very good change. The battle timer, in my opinion, should be 1 hour at most, maybe even 30 minutes. The thing about making the battle timer shorter is good because you can spread it out more over the day. And this is what I've mentioned in so many videos critiquing the issue with Conquest is that you have 3 2-hour windows. First of all, 2 hours is way too long to ask players to sit at their phone. No video game does that anymore, right? Not even Dota 2. Secondly, only having 3 windows a day means that certain players can just never engage in Conquest, even if they wanted to, because they have school, they have work, they have children, they have other commitments. So by creating more battle timers, by reducing the timer itself to 1 hour or even 30 minutes, and then creating more of them throughout the day, right? Even if they cut it down to 1 hour, now instead of having 3 windows to attack, you now have 6. Right? It doubles the opportunities you have to play for people in different time zones with different lifestyles. And then if you cut it down to 30, you have even more than that, right? Even if you don't keep the exact number of hours, if you lower the number of hours of playtime down to, let's say, 4 hours a day, so 30 minutes, you have 8 different windows a day where you can play. That's excellent. As far as reducing the actual full duration of Conquest, I don't really have a big opinion on that. I think it's fine the way that it is, but they could reduce it by 12 hours or 24 hours. I don't think Conquest should be too much shorter than that, though, because they still want to maintain it as like a once per week kind of game mode, so it still needs to feel like there's some investment involved. And then they talk about the simplification of region conquest method. Now, this is good, but they need to remember something. The essence of Alliance Conquest is to use a wide variety of characters from your roster to achieve a huge goal that is impossible for one player to achieve. But it is possible for many players, like 10 or more players, working together to achieve. That's the essence, right? That's the game mode essence of Conquest, is there's this big goal. I can't do it by myself. I need you and you and you and you, and we need to pool together our resources. And we're not just using our one strongest team, we're using everything we got. If we can throw everything we got at this big problem, we can solve it. As long as they can keep that essence of Alliance Conquest intact, I'm fine with whatever changes they want to make, right? Simplification is good. However, let's get into what they didn't mention for Alliance Conquest. So what did they not mention for Alliance Conquest? Well, big one here is rewards. Rewards. The value equation for Alliance Conquest is absolutely terrible because the fun is like, okay, you're working with your teammates, you're using a large variety of your roster. The rewards are like absolutely terrible. The time to complete is like the worst thing in the world. It's so bad. The effort is massive too because you need a whole roster. And then honestly, the complexity, it ranges, but it can be complex, and it is especially complex for newer players if they're jumping into a fully fledged AC-oriented alliance. So the value equation for AC is one of the worst I've ever seen in any game, where you're asking players, hey, give me 6 hours of your time a day for what? A few boxes? A box and a bit of gold? You know, like, listen, Alliance Conquest rewards are okay for me. I don't even play. I just get the rewards that my alliance gets me. And thank them, right? No thanks to me. They get those rewards, and then I get 8 million, 4 million, 10 million gold here and there. But even then, that's not even enough to really talk about, and I don't even play the game mode. I just passively collect the gold. So the rewards and the value equation for AC is awful. It's horrible. What else did they forget to mention? Well, they forgot to mention addressing the issue of 1v1v1. One of the worst decisions they've ever made for a game mode in Marvel Future Fight. 2 alliances routinely gang up on one other alliance because some players have a beef with one of the players in another alliance, or because 2 of the alliances are actually part of the same coalition, and so they purposely gang up on whatever the third alliance is, and they maintain a particular leaderboard ranking so that they can consistently gang up week after week and guarantee winning every single week for one or the other alliance, and they just hot potato it back and forth. This literally happens in the game right now. This isn't a made-up scenario that I'm inventing because of my own conspiracies or my own delusions. This literally happens right now and has been happening in the game for months, for years. And I know players have submitted tickets about this. I know the devs know about this, but they don't seem to want to address it, to care to address it. I don't know what it is, but it's very upsetting, honestly, it's disappointing. Addressing the issue in Conquest of timer watching. So the way that it works with timers is that once you attack a zone, the timer starts, and once you conquer the zone, a timer starts by which, once the timer is done, it's closed and the enemy team can't attack. But because the timer is always superimposed against the full battle timer, the battle window of 2 hours, it creates a cat and mouse game where the players can just do a bit of math in their head and figure out, well, there's 15 minutes to go on this timer, but there's only 37 minutes to go on the battle clock timer before it closes. So this other team is going to have to attack in the next X number of minutes. Otherwise, Y is going to happen. And you essentially have a situation where players will stall, teams will stall, and sort of play with the timer. And it creates a game where you're incentivized not to attack. It creates an incentive where you're incentivized to not play the game. Does that make sense? Yeah, it doesn't make sense because it's a silly situation. So it's possible that lowering the battle timer can address this, or simplifying the region conquest method can alleviate this. But it would be nice for them to acknowledge that it's part of the problem, because it's a big part of the problem. And then finally, for Conquest, they don't address any quality of life changes, which I find bizarre. I know the AC big-time players want, for example, more team save slots. There's only, I believe, 10 team save slots that you can use, 20 if you get really creative. Even then, that's not very good, right? That's not very good. And for a game mode that wants you to use your whole roster, and for a roster that's over 260 characters, there should be 50, 100 team slots. It shouldn't cost them very much to create something like that, and it should be very easy. It's already in the game. They just need to expand it. Finally, they have a general area about the PvP content stat adjustments. Now, this is a great change. They talk about reducing the impact of Pierce in PvP. They talk about changing other stats as well, adjusting ratios of stats, etc. I think this is an excellent change, and I think that they need to really lean into this. I'm not really confident that they will, but I just wanted to end the video and wrap it up with an encouraging sort of little speech here about the game. Be brave, right? As the developers of this game, if you're really committed to making PvP an enjoyable experience, be brave and make mistakes. The only way that you can come to a good change, to a good conclusion, is through trial and error, right? Never in the history of video games has a developer gotten it right the first time, and it's perfect the first time. It's always through iterating and reiterating and reiterating. So make mistakes, be brave, adjust numbers, adjust ratios, test, retest. The fastest way to get to a good conclusion is by doing that, right? The sooner that you arrive at a great change, the better it is for the players. So why not just tell the players after the anniversary, hey guys, from June to September, we're going to be testing PvP. we're going to be pushing out weekly changes to the ratios, right? We'll try to keep you guys up to date with what the changes are, but we may not be able to tell you in time because, we're doing this all on the fly, but we're going to be changing around all the numbers. We're going to be testing out, higher or lower pierce, more or less defense, more or less HP, crit damage, crit rate, movement speed, attack speed. We're going to be tweaking all the numbers. And so, for the next 3 months, just keep that in mind, right? We'll give you guys some rewards here and there to keep everybody happy so that players don't feel frustrated. But you know what? I imagine if you were to do this, that players wouldn't feel frustrated at all. They would be hype. They would be happy. Think about it. Every single time there's a big bug in the game that does some sort of like wacky game-breaking effect, it makes players hype because it's something that they're not used to. And they know that it's not permanent. So that's all you have to tell the players. Tell the players, listen, this is not permanent. These changes that we're making from June to September, each change itself is not permanent. They're just part of a series of tests. So the players know that it's not permanent. And then the players know that there's an end goal in mind that is beneficial for them. Listen, we're testing things from June to September. We're building towards something that is more fair for all players and more fun for all players. So just bear with us for now. And at the end of the road, at the end of the tunnel, there's going to be a big reward for everybody. That PvP will be better, and we'll throw in some new rewards as well. This is all you have to do, right? This is all you have to do. But I fear that this is all a lot of talk, and that the devs will eventually just make 1 or 2 very cautious, very conservative changes. It will have minimal impact on PvP. Players will very quickly, within hours, they will very quickly adjust to the changes, and then the new, very similar meta will emerge, and it'll be done, right? That is unfortunately what I foresee happening. It is also probably like one of the worst case scenarios, but this is what I foresee happening because history tells me that, right? In the last 5 years of the game, the devs have been very cautious and very conservative with all of their decisions in the game, and it doesn't really work, right? For other things in life, it can work, but being cautious and being slow and taking everything so carefully, they use the word carefully 4 times in this dev note. They use the word considering 4 times, right? That doesn't really work. That doesn't work. And you know what? Actually, it does work. It works when you already have a really good system. But when you don't have a really good system, when you acknowledge that the system is bad, and when you acknowledge that the system has flaws, the way that they have in this dev note, that's when you're acknowledging that you have to work faster, right? So that's what I want to leave the video off with. The current way, the previous way of doing things for the devs for PvP hasn't worked. Let's be honest. Whatever they've been doing for PvP hasn't really worked. They need to try something new, and they should try lots of new things. That's the way that they're going to find out what works best for the players, what makes them the most money, and then that's how they'll know for sure to stick with that. Anyways, I was trying to make this video shorter. I failed. Thank you so much for watching. Smash the like button if you enjoyed the content, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.